Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France-WENTE debate. We're digesting what happened in the Iowa caucuses. We looked at the Republicans in part one. We'll be looking at the Democrats in a moment. And we're doing it in the company of two Republican strategists, both in Washington, D.C. Dan Hazelwood is with us, and so is Patrick Ruffini. Welcome back to both of you, gentlemen. Welcome back as well to Stephen Schale. From Tallahassee, Florida, Democratic strategist who ran the Obama campaign back in 2008 in that state, and Zachary Miller, who supports Bernie Sanders and is the producer of the upcoming documentary made by journalist Greg Palast, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Welcome back to the show. I just wanted to put a quick question to Steve Schale before we talk about the Democrats. That record high turnout we saw in Iowa on the Republican side, does that only reflect on Iowa, or is that the shape of things to come? And if so, what does it say about American politics today?
Well, first of all, I would note that we still had more folks turn out than they did last night. But I mean, listen, the party out of power for two cycles tends to get pretty excited about elections. I mean, we benefited from that in 2008, where our party activists were fired up to go work for anybody to sort of change directions. And I think it's one of the things my side needs to worry about. Frankly, I think that having a competitive primary between Sanders and Clinton is a good thing. It'll help drive more enthusiasm towards the general election, because right now I think we are at a little bit of enthusiasm gap.
An enthusiasm gap, however, we're going to see how that's playing out, of course, now in New Hampshire. Before the sun had even risen on the town of Bow this Tuesday, Bernie Sanders was already on the campaign trail, the senator from neighboring Vermont, fresh from his dead heat with Hillary Clinton in Iowa.
I cannot believe. What time is this? As you know, we just got in from Iowa, where we astounded the world. And now in New Hampshire, we're going to astound the world again.
Steve Schale, I asked if Ted Cruz was for real. Is Bernie Sanders for real?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm a pretty conservative Democrat. I'm not very aligned with Bernie's politics, but you have to give the guy credit. I mean, 3.5 million donors, raised $20 million, last month alone, went from 5% to 50% in Iowa in a matter of 6 months. I mean, what he's done is remarkable. I think the problem is that at this point, there's been no evidence he's able to build a coalition beyond liberal whites. You know, when you look to past New Hampshire, which I think he'll do very well in, you get to South Carolina and the states after that, like Alabama and Georgia and Virginia, you run into states that have really large African-American, in some cases large Hispanic populations. At this point, again, virtually every poll that's out there shows that he just gets, pretty much wiped by Hillary Clinton among those voters. So unless something over the next 2 or 3 weeks changes and he's able to really reach in and sort of prove he's more viable with those minority voters, it's hard for me to see him having a viable campaign past New Hampshire.
Zachary Miller?
Well, not being a liberal white, but more of a progressive black, I beg to differ. I think Bernie's reach is going to really expand once he gets more media attention and once he's known. We have several Hillary supporters who have come over, like Nina Turner from my home state of Ohio, who have come over from Hillary to Bernie. And I think the enthusiasm in the Bernie camp is just amazing.
Once he's better known, I mean, this campaign we've been covering it all the time
absolutely.
Here in France.
Yeah.
Voters don't yet know the candidates?
A lot of voters don't know the candidates in America. They wait until it comes to their state. Hillary has, of course, a huge Clinton name recognition is amazing. And a lot of voters don't know Bernie yet and often don't focus on the campaign until the first primary, or caucus in this case. And I think as there are more debates, more chances for a wider population to get to know him and get to know what he stands for, I think it's going to be amazing. I think just like, back in when Bill Clinton was first running, they called him the comeback kid. For a third place, actually, comeback. But Bernie came back 40 points in this Iowa caucus to tie it. I mean, if he's not a kid, but if you want to call anybody a comeback kid, you should probably call Bernie Sanders that.
All right, Dan Hazelwood and Patrick Ruffini, both in part one of our discussion, saying that you can basically throw out the polls after looking at, because there always is an Iowa bump. How much of an Iowa bump, Patrick Ruffini, will Bernie Sanders get?
Well, I think in some respects, this was a remarkable performance by Bernie Sanders. About a month ago, he was 15 points behind in Iowa. He started the campaign 53 points behind. So Hillary Clinton lost a 53-point lead. And at the start of this campaign, no elected Democrat other than Martin O'Malley would challenge Hillary Clinton. The only one who really stepped up and mounted a viable campaign isn't really even a Democrat. He's an independent socialist senator from Vermont. So I think it's quite remarkable. And regardless of whether or not Hillary or Bernie gets the nomination, I think it's quite remarkable that Democrats have expressed this much dissatisfaction with Hillary Clinton when she has had, this was supposed to be a coronation for her, that has received literally, I think, every elected official endorsement that has been out there. And yet could barely make it out of Iowa, the state that she was supposed to be strongest in of the first two states.
Dan Hazelwood, there were a lot of, shall we say, Machiavellian grins when the Democrats saw the Republicans tear each other apart between the insiders, the outsiders. Is the same true in reverse? The Republicans pleased to see somebody who's to the far left of the party taking on the candidate, and perhaps also there creating divisions.
Oh, well, it's always amusing to have your competitor having troubles and having squabbles like a family dinner. The thing that we shouldn't overlook here in this process is that Hillary Clinton has always been a really bad candidate. She was not a good help to Bill Clinton in 1992. Some of her famous phrases helped energize Republicans. She was a bad candidate in 2008, and Obama was a great candidate and beat her soundly. And she's shown a lot of mistakes this campaign, and she represents the past. And talk about the enthusiasm gap. The Democrats are trying to coalesce around her because they want to hold power. That's what a party after 8 years is all about. How can I hold power? And they're trying to grab and hold her, and Bernie's coming in with this new energy in this different direction. And so everything that's going on in this process is actually, I think, underscoring the fact that, she represents this throwback to the past, and the country, after 8 years of any one party in control of the White House, is going to be looking for the next phase. So this is actually, I think, a double crippling blow for the Democrats. They have this fight that they have to deal with in the short term, and they're probably going to end up with Hillary as this candidate who is wedded to the past, that is not a very good campaigner, not a very good candidate. So, we have to, for the Republican side, there's a lot of grins to be had.
Steve Shale?
Well, I mean, I think that the primary is a healthy thing. I mean, just the fact you get more people engaged in the system, more people getting out registering voters and identifying supporters. I'm not so worried about the fallout from the primary. I'm going to withhold judgment on Sanders till we get to South Carolina. I certainly agree that these things are fluid. But I mean, when you look at just sort of the trajectory of these things, at this point, he really hasn't shown much ability to create, any enthusiasm outside of sort of.
And to Dan Hazelwood's point that Hillary's a poor campaigner.
Well, I mean, certainly she got exposed in Iowa in 2008. Now, I will say that she bounced back. I mean, frankly, I thought that she was at her best. You may remember when we talked about Joe Biden getting in the race a few months ago. I thought she got pretty good with the threat of Biden looming out there. And I think, frankly, she'll get better with Sanders' challenge. But yeah, I mean, I don't question. I would not argue that she took Iowa for granted, probably took Sanders for granted for way too long. But, she's been through this before. I'm pretty sure she'll bounce back. And again, I expect her to get clobbered in New Hampshire in much the same way that Paul Tsongas won New Hampshire in 1992. It's pretty favorable to home court. But I think South Carolina is a really different challenge for Sanders. You can't underestimate how strong the Clinton brand is among African Americans and Hispanics. That electorate's almost 50% made up of minorities. I think it's a huge lift for Bernie. And then the states that follow that look a lot like South Carolina: Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, Georgia, Oklahoma. Those are all places, again, that I think it's going to be tough for Sanders once he gets past New Hampshire.
All right, Clinton blowing that double-digit lead. This is how she spun it when she spoke to her supporters on Monday night in Iowa.
It is rare that we have the opportunity we do now to have a real contest of ideas, to really think hard about what the Democratic Party stands for and what we want the future of our country to look like if we do our part to build it. I am a progressive who gets things done for people.
Zachary Miller, if she does go on to become the nominee, as the rest of the panel's been predicting, will you campaign for her, or will you simply just hold your nose and vote on election day?
No, I think the Democratic Party is pretty united. I think whoever the candidate is, that the whole party will rally around them. I mean, we have our internal differences, but it's nothing like the Republicans' catfight that we've witnessed in these past few months. So I think that, you know, the whole party will rally around either candidate who becomes the nominee. And will they really rally around somebody?
Oh, yeah. Bill Clinton was first president in 1993. They feel as though the Clintons have been around maybe for too long?
Well, a lot of people feel that, you know, Democrats and Republicans and independents maybe feel that. But I think when you see the alternative, you're going to rally around the Democratic candidate because they are just so much head and shoulders over any of the Republican candidates. So I don't feel any fear that there will be a lack of enthusiasm for whoever the Democratic candidate is among the Democrats.
And that brings us to another point, is that whatever happens, Patrick Ruffini, everyone's predicting, I mean, you know, every 4 years is negative campaigning anyway, but they feel as though people are fired up by who they dislike more than by who they like this time around.
Well, look, I mean, we've certainly, when we get into a general election environment, we have certainly seen that in previous elections. But I think that, you know, we have to wait and see who the nominees are. I mean, I think certainly if Hillary Clinton is the nominee, we kind of know what that is going to look like. If somebody like Marco Rubio is the nominee, who's younger, who brings a fresher approach to politics, then I think Democrats are going to have potentially a hard time defining him. You know, I think he represents. I mean, when they were preparing virtually the entire election cycle to run against Trump, now they might be preparing to run against Cruz. But if you have a candidate who sort of represents sort of a different outlook, a different type of Republican candidate, I think that could confound the Democrats a little bit. And we have seen, I think it's quite ironic that in the end, it turned out to be a little bit more of a mess in terms of the result in Iowa on the Democratic side than it actually turned out to be on the Republican side, particularly with the fear that I think many people in Washington had of somebody like Donald Trump actually prevailing in that first state and potentially running the table throughout, going into New Hampshire and then throughout all of the early states. So we will see what happens. But I think it really, all of that, the divisiveness, all of that really depends on what kind of nominees we get and how they campaign and how they conduct themselves in the general election.
I have a hard time understanding why outsiders are doing so well. Here in this country, we have double-digit unemployment. We have anemic growth. Why is the United States so dissatisfied with its political establishment?
Well, I do think that in many ways, Donald Trump represents in some ways a similar vein to the political, to the kind of center right, what we've seen in the right in Europe and the right-wing parties in Europe. Now that does seem to be fading a little bit. Now that Iowa has voted potentially, so we'll see how that shakes out in the next few weeks.
Dan Hazelwood.
Well, I think you have to be careful with comparing countries to countries, and Americans don't wake up in the morning and say, "How am I doing relative to someone in Paris or someone in Marseille or someone in Berlin?" They wake up and say, "How am I doing today versus last week versus last year?" And Americans are frustrated with the state of our economy. You have 5%
like to think of
ourselves as a strong, dynamic country. Well, we have a 5% actual unemployment, but there's a huge number of people in the tens of millions that have just stopped seeking work. So there's a lot of people who want a better life, who want to be working, who can't. And that is not a left-right issue. That is a issue across the spectrum. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the direction we're going, and there's a lot of different answers to where we should go. But it's one of the reasons why our turnout is going up in this election. If you look at elections around the world, in the United States, but we've seen it in other countries as well, when voters are more concerned about, they think there's more at stake, when it's a serious outcome decision, they're more likely to get energized, get involved, and the rhetoric is going to become more highly charged. You know, it's the same thing for a football club. If you're used to your football club always being in the championship, you expect that, and when the team doesn't get there, you want a new coach. Well, we're now about to have to pick a new coach, and we're concerned that we haven't had a coach for the last number of years that has performed the way that we want our country to perform. So there's a lot of energy and a lot of intensity that's driving up turnout, and you see that in both parties, more so in Republicans right now for reasons we've talked about. But people want a much more dynamic economics in the country. They want a much more accomplishment and results-oriented government to be achieving things, and it's failing. If you're on the left, you wanted Obamacare to work. It's been a mess.
Steve Shale, will you agree it's going to be tough for the Democrats, that the Republicans are more fired up?
Well, I mean, I think to Dan's point, the one place I think I'd maybe take a little bit broader view. If you look back at history, the last time our country had politics like we have today was sort of the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we were going really from an agrarian economy to an urban industrial economy. And what you've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, and actually that period was very often back and forth, as folks were just having a hard time getting settled into the new way of making a living. And I think you're seeing a lot of that now. We've kind of gone from this basic American dream where you could go to high school and work in a factory for 40 years and get a pension, and sort of things were affordable and there was a path forward, to the sort of new economy where you're really on your own. I mean, you're competing against everybody in the world, where job skills are different. And I think until we get comfortable as a society with that's the way that the world's going to be going forward for the next 50 or 100 years, you're going to see this back and forth politically. I mean, we've had arguably 4, 5, 6 consecutive wave elections. And I think, again, it's going to take some time for folks to get comfortable with the way that the economy works now. And I think it's going to play in our politics like that for the time being.
All right, the comparisons run years back when it comes to U.S. politics. The process can seem, well, a little arcane to those who are not on the inside. I'll give you an example. Iowa has 1,683 precincts. In 3 of them on Monday night, the vote was a dead heat on the Democratic side. So what did they do? A coin toss. And for the record, it was Clinton who won all 3 of those coin tosses. Zachary Miller, I'm not saying that's an omen. That's not the question I'm asking you. My question is, how do you explain to French people, because here in Paris, A, what a caucus is, B, why Iowa and New Hampshire get to vote first, and why this process seems, well, a little bit convoluted?
Yeah, it's hard to explain to Americans about a caucus or the whole why Iowa comes first. We just say it's tradition. But we had a
Do you like the American system? Do you like the way it is?
I like the way it is, but, I would like to see it streamlined and improved and changed. It needs to be upgraded, updated. The caucus system is fun, but it's kind of bizarre, and it doesn't seem to be the best way to elect a president. And I think a lot of things could change for the better.
Patrick Ruffini, I remember when Super Tuesdays came into being, and everybody said, oh, it's great, it's going to streamline the process, it's not going to be so long and intricate and so expensive. But it turned out that's not the case.
Well, actually, I will say I kind of do like this system, and the reason is I do think it gives a chance for voters in those early states to really winnow the field. If we had gone into a national primary with 17 candidates, I think somebody like Donald Trump, who had a lot of media attention, who dominated the press for so long, even though he didn't have to air a lot of TV ads, would have won in a landslide. And so the fact when you have these early states that, are able to winnow this field down. And frankly, I think there are a lot of elements of the, while I don't think that is the right system for every state, I do think that it does force people to take their role in these states pretty seriously, and it has actually, I think, served to produce better nominees. If we, just had a national primary, you'd have entire states just simply be ignored by this process. So I do think it gives a chance to smaller states, to more rural states. And there's obviously a question of, as to which states maybe those should be. Should it always be Iowa? Should it always be New Hampshire? But I do think I do think there is a role for tradition in this process, and I think it has been a healthy role, and I think we saw that in Iowa last night.
Steve Shale, do you wish Florida was first?
Yeah, I mean, I actually do wish that a state like Florida was up early. First of all, it's a lot warmer down here. People folks would rather be in Sarasota than be in Des Moines. But I do think that, while I agree with Patrick, I think it's good to have some of these early testing grounds. I also think it would be helpful to the process, whether it's Florida or a place like Michigan or Ohio, to have an early state that looks more like a general electorate. I think one of the reasons why you see these interesting results is these states really aren't representative of what a general electorate looks like, or the American population at large looks like. And while I'm not going to get into the Iowa New Hampshire fight, I've been in that one before, and usually it just leads to a lot of angry emails from my friends in Iowa and New Hampshire. I do wish the calendar had an earlier big state. Again, I think it would be a good test for candidates going forward.
All right, the Draft Florida movement started by Steve Shale. I want to thank you for joining us from Tallahassee. I want to thank Dan Hazelwood and Patrick Ruffini in Washington. Zachary Miller, stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. So a look at how this has played out on US media and social media, starting with the New York Times. Clinton wins Iowa by thinnest of margins. Cruz deals Trump a humbling loss. And I think it was humiliating was how it was put in an earlier version of that same page. So that's how the New York Times is summing up the both sides of that particular.
The New York
Iowa
Post went
caucus.
with crucified, I think.
We'll get to them because they're much more visual. First of all, the Des Moines Register. Cruz won Iowa the old-fashioned way he earned it. So it's interesting to see that from their point of view, this was really about old-fashioned canvassing, taking a coach or a bus, going city to city to city to city to city, unlike Donald Trump, who was jetting around. So from their point of view, really, it was down to old-fashioned canvassing that he won.
And he got a record high turnout.
Absolutely. The New Yorker looking towards the Democratic side of things, and of course the under 40 vote really overwhelmingly to Bernie Sanders. And from their point of view, this has just changed the Democratic Party. I mean, this is a key moment, a watershed moment, if you like. Now, there are those headlines that you were talking about, François, in the New York tabloids. New York Post crucified. Trump left humbled by Ted's victory. I'm not sure if he really was that humbled, but anyway, that's how it was being interpreted. And as opposed to dead man walking, dead clown walking. So I think we can see what the New York Daily News thinks of Donald Trump there, very much editorializing on that front page. One of the most prominent Twitter users from out of Libya, Hend Amri, saying, I just heard Ted Cruz's first words on his Iowa caucus win. To God goes the glory. Isn't that a Republican for Allahu Akbar? That's a whole other debate, I suppose, François. I just want to throw that in there, but we could spend a lot of time discussing that. Moving over to the Democratic side of things, I suppose really the shock for the Clinton campaign, even if it was potentially or probably anticipated.
You're playing to the crowd here. Zachary Miller is chuckling away.
Right. I hadn't
The
seen that.
shine.
It's funny.
Well, breaking through the door with all sorts of barriers coming tumbling down. This is a Donald Trump. I'm kind of going back and forth here between the two sides. Donald Trump on Twitter, he is famously controversial on social media, and this for an Israeli Twitter user is basically blaming the voters. I don't believe I have been given any credit by the voters for self-funding my campaign. This is Donald Trump on Twitter. I'm the only one. I will keep doing it, but it's not worth it. So a slightly childish kind of attitude there. And others digging up tweets from Donald Trump's Twitter account going back to 2013. That's a little unfortunate, really, given the result yesterday evening. But I think Donald Trump will be remembered. I think he will be remembered, regardless of what happens. Now, do you know that Bernie Sanders has ladies' underwear
Right.
printed after him? But before anyone accuses me of being sexist, François, men's briefs as well. So there is a huge personality cult around the person of Bernie Sanders.
Or budding merchandising.
Indeed, hashtag feel the burn, and you can see there really that I suppose the principal person feeling that the burn of the result really is Hillary Clinton, because of course this really does mean that the Sanders campaign cannot be underestimated. What else do we have? But of course, for many on social media, Bernie Sanders is just a communist, and no matter how much you try to explain the nuances, etc., 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 I've been showing there are a lot of pro-Sanders tweets, but really you're also seeing this when you type in Bernie.
They say U.S. elections are won, like in France, with those independent voters. Is he too left-wing?
No, in fact, it's a remarkable thing. We have people saying that, Republicans saying that Bernie Sanders, they like, you know, and they could, it's odd, but there's one person who's a Trump and then Sanders, which I can't understand, but there are a lot of people who are Republican that like what Sanders is saying.
Well, I guess if millennials turn out to vote, according to this tweet, then it could be Sanders. He does seem to be cornering the younger vote.
All right, we'll leave it there. Many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.